Hi, I'm Kristo Vaher. I'm the CTO for the government of Estonia. Today, X-Road is almost 20 years old. It has been one of the foundational success layers of Estonian digital government, and we aim to keep it so for the next 20 years as well. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about distributed, decentralized, and decoupled 2.0. All of those keywords have been ones that have been used to describe Estonia's digital government in the past. We've managed to decentralize everything in different administration sectors, and everybody is able to develop their own technology for their own domain in the way they find best. But X-Road connects everything. And now we need to look into the future to see how X-Road can also support such use cases in the future. Let me briefly start with the story. Many of you have heard me tell various stories regarding where we would actually want digital services to be in the future. Whether if you are visiting with your partner in Finland and you have a baby born very, very prematurely compared to being in Estonia, and you need to handle the situation in a different environment, or you have a car crash and you don't really know what to do and you need help. Ideally, you would have someone physically assisting you, someone that knows all the answers, that is a know-it-all person that for some reason has all the answers for your any kind of specific problem. But Estonian government doesn't have enough money, or any government has enough money to provide these kind of physical assistance for every citizen whenever a need arises. So what if we can actually provide a digital one? What if we can solve this with technology and with the help of X-Road? So a few years ago, we started thinking about this, that if this is the gold standard that we try to aim for, what are the technical things that we need to do to make this actually happen? And this ended up as a white paper, a concept paper called the Next Generation Digital Government Architecture, which has been published earlier this year and is for recommended reading for a lot of you architects and engineers out there. But some of the key points that this document actually addresses. For one thing, it's about breaking down silos. It's about not building huge monolithic silos in various governmental and administration sectors, as well as in private sector, and start providing services in a more proactive way. So there are multiple things that we need to do in order to make this happen, in order for us to provide these services in the way as I described in the story very briefly. For one thing, we need to start following the Conway's law as much as possible. We need to make sure that the information systems that we design are flexible and are dynamic, and that we can make changes when need arises, rather than having to break everything down and rebuild them from the ground up, which is a far more expensive problem that government has no money for. Secondly, domain-driven design. Domain-driven design is one of the ways how these information systems should be designed from the ground up. This is not just an engineer's and architect's problem. This is a business problem as well. So in cooperation between business and technical architects, an actual system design should be created. And last but not least, keyword of BPMs, or business process modeling tools. Now, a lot of architects would argue that BPMs may not be the silver bullet that they are, but right now there exists a hypothesis that it might be for governments, and it might be for distributed service provision for citizens. Because you're dealing with orchestration across the whole government, across multiple administration sectors, to provide the citizen a single service. Second point is from websites to intelligent virtual assistant, Grait AI. I think that websites are dead. I'm not the first person to say this. I think that people really would not want to use websites. They would just want to use their natural environment to get whatever services they need. And learning the user interfaces of websites is an outright pain that most of us in the future do not want to deal with. This is especially problematic for governments, because government websites are not something that every citizen wakes up in the morning and visits as the first thing. They visit websites that are related to news portals and social media, not government web portals, which means that the government has encountered the problem of websites long before private sector likely will. But we need to address it now. We need to create services in user interfaces that are different, but that don't require you to relearn over and over again. And what is this natural way of doing things? Obviously, communication, your voice, your text, your words, your sentences, your queries, and doing those with the help of virtual assistants. So you're asking a virtual assistant. You ask your phone, or you call a specific number, or you send a text message, and a robot is going to automate, address, and orchestrate everything that needs to happen in order for you to get your service. So there are multiple things that, again, need addressing here as well. It needs to be an ecosystem. There's not going to be a single virtual assistant that solves everything. There's going to be an ecosystem of virtual assistants. Some virtual assistants are going to be smart. Others are going to be less so and maybe just redirected to a specific website. But in ideal way, it's going to be an ecosystem of cooperating virtual assistants. So if one needs help, for example, if Estonian government web portal needs help from police authority chatbot, then they can communicate between one another. And the document is going to also address how we might be able to do this. Secondly, we need to also do it for cross-border integrations. We need to start thinking about the fact that citizens expect their service provision to happen regardless where they are, not just in a physical territory. They want this similar kind of help even if they are in another country. If they need help from the hospital and they don't speak the local language, they still expect a virtual assistant to help them with the local language. And last but not least, graceful degradation. We need to make sure that this new kind of architecture doesn't create a big bang problem. There's not going to be one day when every service is suddenly going to be provided by virtual assistant. It's going to happen gradually. In certain administration sectors, it's going to happen first. In others, years down the road, hopefully all within 20 years. The third point is about technical architecture in general. From creating a movement from monoliths to event-driven microservice architecture. And I'm going to touch on the event-driven stuff a little bit further down the road here as well. But ideally, we need to stop creating huge monoliths that are very resistant to change. Because the larger the monolith is, the harder it is to find a partner or an engineer to actually make those changes that are required. So one of the key words here is autonomy. All of the services need to be built in a way that even if the whole world around them fails, that they themselves still succeed. That they are still able to be up and running. If you create dependencies across information systems, even using X-Road, if you create a lot of dependencies, then your own information system will fail if some of the central other registries are going to fail. You need to plan for this. You need to design for this. Secondly, cloud native. We are well beyond the years when cloud is a new thing. Cloud has been around for a long time. But in terms of government architecture, we are still slightly lagging behind. And X-Road needs to support us in this transition as well. And of course, last but not least, event-driven architecture, which I'm going to focus on the next few slides. But what we're doing really is we're paving a way for a new gold standard of GovTech. What we hope is to create a set of principles and a set of standards that not just Estonia can follow or Finland can follow, but other governments as well. Because if we are able to create an ecosystem for providing these kind of digital services, then we are also able to actually integrate those services cross-border a lot more. So in terms of event-driven architecture, classically, as you know, X-Road is used to make sure that data is moved between two different information systems with security server right between them. So you're making a direct coupled request to another service. If the service is down, you need to handle the failure. You need to deal with something. Usually what happens is your own service also fails, which is a problem that we don't really want in this day and age in 2020. We have far more information systems and we want far more flexibility. We don't want this direct end-to-end connectivity and synchronous coupling between information systems. So in order to solve this, we need to look at event-driven architecture, which again is not a new term, but might be a new term in terms of in the scale of government. So when we're dealing with event-driven architecture, the communication and coupling of the systems does not happen directly. It happens in a concept called like a message room, such as a publish-subscribe message room, such as Kafka, or other related technologies. So the idea is that your events, your queries, and your requests are going to end up in a standardized form in this message room. And this message room is going to provide you the answer once the answer is provided to this message room by another service, such as the service B on the picture. What this means really is that you are going to let go of the idea that your systems expect to talk to very specific other system. You can replace the other system, or you can add new systems to the message rooms that are able to maybe provide you the same answer much quicker or in a more higher quality manner. And of course, this will mean that you might have multiple systems in this message room. The core idea would be that the security still remains. You still have control over who has access to this message room, but the core security of X-Road would still remain. So when we're looking at X-Road itself, from my perspective, what X-Road would have to do for the next 20 years to remain relevant, there are multiple little things. Some of these things have already been brainstormed with various X-Road developers, together with private sector and public sector, but it's still important to communicate them out as expectations that I see that X-Road needs to be relevant 20 years down the road. For one thing, we really need this implementation and integration of publish-subscribe message rooms. We internally call them X-Rooms. This has been sort of anecdote of sorts, but it fits so that X-Road would provide these X-Rooms where messages can be exchanged. Secondly, we need the ability of X-Road to directly support or mediate transfer of large-scale data. We see that big data and data analysis, and especially with the emergence of 5G and IoT devices, there's going to be a lot of data being exchanged that requires both transparency, control, and security that X-Road traditionally provides. But X-Road is not ready there yet. So we need to see how it could be so that it remains relevant. Because if government data becomes relevant only in large scale, then X-Road still would have to be the tool to provide access to this. Then, of course, ease of setup and operability in the cloud. It's very important to find a way so that you can take X-Road as a technology from the shelf and set it up within 15 minutes, such as you would with other large-scale and important information systems, so that you can try it out, so that you can see if it works for you, see how it works, and see how you can actually benefit from this. And of course, we really need also blueprints, and we need playbooks. We need examples. We need someone, if a new government wants to digitalize itself, we need for them to have a very quick understanding of how they can benefit from X-Road. They should not invest huge amounts of money for analysis and research in order to get to this result. It should be possible otherwise. It should be possible with holding maybe hand, maybe creating better documentation or a better way into X-Road. And of course, cross-border readiness as a possible solution for international interoperability in European Union and beyond. I think that traditionally X-Road being used internationally has been somewhat hampered and has been a little bit difficult for various reasons also listed here before. But I think that now, if we look at what are the needs today, what we are researching, what we are looking at for the next 20 years, there might be a new kind of opportunity. And of course, I welcome everybody to be involved, to make X-Road better, to provide private sector services that use X-Road, as well as enhanced services in the public sector to get there. Because I truly believe that X-Road is going to be relevant in 20 years' time. And if this is not the case, while we still did all that on that slide, please look me up, I owe you a beer. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do the Q&A now. So, full disclosure, maybe you can work it out. Kristo wasn't in the studio with us right now. He pre-recorded yesterday. There was some business. Kristo, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, no problems there. Okay, you had to go on some last-minute travel, had to do some things today.
No, that's the magic of Estonian digital technology. And now I'm suddenly in a different place.
Oh, look at this guy. He's always on brand every time. I like it. Very good. Now, by the way, we want to remind everybody listening that you can ask your questions on our virtual guide here. If you're on the xroad.global site, it's the purplish one that you may be already watching us through. You can click on Kristo's picture there, go to the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring our questions here as well. But Kristo, I had a few questions myself looking at your presentation. First thing is, can you elaborate a little bit more on how the government might use X-Road in the cloud? Is that something the government, I mean, is your officer looking at, or is that something more you're thinking, oh, others might want to implement that?
Oh, we're definitely looking at this. Just like we have looked at cloud strategy as a whole across the government technology architecture. Today, we are in a situation where a lot of stuff is still being run by our internal houses in their own data centers. And we are exploring the options how to get everything into cloud in the most feasible manner as possible. We've had internal discussions regarding that the success of Estonia has led to a situation where everybody expects everything to be digital. But of course, everything digital still has a price label on it. And we need to sort of find ways how we can optimize. And cloud is an obvious means how to optimize these things.
Okay, so I mean, at a realistic level, that's saying you don't necessarily want to be running your own data centers as much, or you don't want to be necessarily hosting that. You'd rather, is that sort of a broader, is this a broader push by the government to not host as much stuff themselves?
I'm a strong believer that you should only build stuff that you really know best, or at least you have a hypothesis that you know it best, and you should use everything else as a service, as long as you assure security and quality that are requirements for other reasons. But in that sense, I really don't think that everybody should just build and set up their own data centers and compete over the resources in order to do so. I think that various websites or services that don't have data that needs to be stored in a secure manner in a higher security level, it really should be using public clouds. It really should be using more widely public clouds. A lot of the citizen-facing front ends, a lot of information websites really don't have any need not to be anywhere else other than in public clouds, where it's far more optimal.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. A few more of our topics. You did mention talking about one of the requirements moving forward will be to handle larger amounts of data transferred. That we're seeing that we're going to have to just ship just more megabytes, more gigabytes of data through these systems. Yeah. Technically, what's the bottleneck right now, or what are the issues right now with shipping larger amounts of data through the current implementation?
I think that what has happened is that it's not that large amount of data becomes a surprise to anyone or has surprised anyone that this is something that is about to happen. Everybody has seen it for years down the road, but the pace at how quickly data has become humongous has been maybe somewhat of a surprise to government that wants to store everything just in case, because we might need to look at some of the earlier stuff in a retroactive manner. And when we look at like satellite imaging, or if we look at large-scale data feeds or large-scale analysis from logs, or if we look at video streams, then there's huge amounts of data that we need to really take care of. And I believe that traditionally, the way we have looked at X-Road, it has been just to move sets of data in a very secure and assured manner, which doesn't necessarily apply to large-scale data yet. Yes, you can move large-scale data with X-Road, but in terms of data analysis and real-time data analysis, it becomes a problem. And as Geroli mentioned here previously, we've been doing workshops in order to see how and what kind of role X-Road might play in making sure this happens. Because my concern here is that if, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, is if large-scale data and moving large-scale data becomes a necessary part of government architecture and X-Road is unable to provide this layer, then this means that X-Road itself will become more irrelevant, and we end up with a wild west of data exchange again, where custom technologies are being used, which we definitely want to avoid.
Okay, that does make sense. I mean, I know originally from the sort of the beginnings of the X-Road, it was about sending messages. I need to send my data. I want to look at my healthcare data. I want to look at my driving license data. This is not a particularly large data set to have to move across, and that was where a lot of the fundamental choices came from. And now we're thinking, okay, we've got to move a gigabyte of satellite data. And I see what you mean, that you don't want to have that gigabytes of satellite data being sent sort of around somehow else, because we can't ship it right down the middle. We don't want to have as you say, a wild west of just, well, we'll send it on some other channel just because the X-Road can't take a few gigabytes or something. So this makes sense. Okay, going to the questions here that people have asked online. The question is, do you see X-Road being used by businesses as well as government? And for something, let's say, even say for a B2B situation, do you think that this could be useful for maybe certain sectors or segments to get into? And I mean, extending that even further, could that be even like platforms that are being offered, like cloud platforms? What are your thoughts in that area?
I definitely think this is a great question. And I definitely also believe that definitely this could be one of the ways. B2B for using X-Road, I think X-Road itself comes with certain expectations or certain labels on it. That if you know that the government uses it, then people and businesses obviously assume that the government has the utmost care over security and reliability of technology that they are using. So if a government uses it, then it adds a certain criteria that might become really important for businesses. If businesses start using X-Road, and X-Road can be used between businesses as well, it hasn't been designed in a way that you can only use it for government data sharing. That if businesses would start using this as well, then two key things will happen. For one thing, they can do data interoperability in a way that government does it, which means they can again believe that this works for them for just as well as it would for a government. But also it would streamline if they themselves have to do data exchange with the government. It will simplify because, again, they're using similar standards and similar principles. But of course, in order for making X-Road more attractive to businesses overall, we do need to make sure that it is more cloud ready, and that it is more easy to set up. Because we have had encounters where IT companies have had trouble setting up security servers, for example. And this is something we definitely need to address, because engineers in general, especially earlier in their careers, are extremely impatient. And I have been as well, that if you don't really get stuff running in a day or maybe even in a week, then you're just going to give up on it. And you would really, at least in this day and age where a lot of stuff is, you just take it off the shelf, deploy it on your data center, and everything works. In this day and age, similar expectations, even if not exactly the same expectations, would have to apply to X-Road as well.
That makes sense. I think to add on to what you're saying there, what can help to have private adoption in organizations? I think two factors. One is that, first of all, that we've got professional service companies who are offering their services to help with these implementations. If any large company is going to implement some sort of integration, middleware or layer, you're mostly not doing it yourself. At least you've got some professional help, a few consultants, if you're not outsourcing the whole thing. So having that ecosystem, I think, helps. And then my observation has been that it'll probably start with one particular sector, and it'll probably start with one or two big players in that sector who say, hey, this is how we do it. This is X-Road. You want to talk with us? You're going to have to talk X-Road, and that's how things kick off. But Kristo, we need to leave it there. Our time is running out. Thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Yes, thank you.